To our top story now, the Federal Police has established a task force to combat a rise in anti-Semitism in response to the arson attack on a synagogue in Melbourne, which is now being investigated as a terrorist incident. But the head of ASIO has rejected suggestions that the government should be held to blame for the attack. Shadow Home Affairs Minister James Patterson joins us in the studio. Welcome to you, James.
Thank you for having me.
You've been with the community a number of times. How are they going and how are people responding to this awful attack?
The Adust Israel community is a small and secluded community, and they are completely shocked to be a target of an attack like this. They go about their business and their faith in an unobtrusive way without impacting on anyone else in the community, and they are descendants of Holocaust survivors who built that shul as a centre for Jewish learning and life. And for them to be attacked like this has been deeply shocking to them and traumatising to them, but they are grateful for the support that many in the wider Australian community have shown them over the weekend.
What do you think they need right now in terms of leadership, in terms of security?
They do feel disappointed that more political leaders haven't come and witnessed the scenes themselves and seen it. I think it is strange that we're now 5 days on from this happening and the Prime Minister still hasn't attended, and nor has any senior National Security Minister of the government, not the Home Affairs Minister, not the Attorney General. I think that's an important show of solidarity, and it is reflective of the government's priorities that the Prime Minister has chosen to do other things rather than do this. In practical terms, what they're going to need is a lot of help rebuilding. Their synagogue has been destroyed. It was a fire, but it looks like a bomb has gone off inside. The entire interior of the synagogue has been completely destroyed, and they're going to have to raise a lot of money to do that rebuilding. So
that, to you, would suggest a very coordinated, quite well-planned attack from what you have seen down there at the scene?
I suspect that the people who are alleged to be behind this attack knew exactly what they were doing. They appear to be someone who's arrived prepared for this. They apparently had a tool to break into the synagogue. They had an accelerant to do the damage, and they also bought brooms to push the accelerant under the doors into the synagogue, and the effect of it was an extraordinary effect. It wasn't an amateur operation by my estimation, and it does sound like the police have made good progress in identifying the suspects, and I hope they're very quickly apprehended.
Let's talk about this new task force, Avalite, which sounds like quite a comprehensive response to the rise and the concerns around anti-Semitism in the community. Do you welcome this step and this announcement?
I do, but to be honest, I think it's a day late and a dollar short. It's actually not really a task force, it's a special operation, and that sounds like a subtle distinction, but it's an important one. A special operation is a routine thing that the Federal Police and State Police do all the time. They set it up to investigate a particular crime type. What the opposition has called for, and what the Jewish community, more importantly, has called for, is a standing task force that brings in not just the Federal Police and ASIO, but all other arms of law enforcement, security and intelligence at the federal level, agencies like AUSTRAC and ACIC, to have a really standing investigating force with significant resources to tackle this anti-Semitic threat in our country, because it has got out of control over the last 14 months, and the Jewish community feels like they've been ignored. They have been warning that something like this was going to happen, and they feel like this is their worst fears realised.
What would you do differently, and what would you have done differently in the months leading up to this attack? Because you have been very critical of the federal government, and I think it's important for people to understand what steps you would have taken differently.
I think two things have been missing since the 7th of October in our country. One is we haven't had the moral clarity and courage in calling out this cancer of anti-Semitism, because it's not just a threat to the Jewish community, it's a threat to our country and our character as a country. We're a great country, but we haven't been at our best in the last year, and we've tolerated too much of this. The second thing is enforcement of the law. People have been wantonly breaching the law almost every weekend at some of these rallies in Melbourne and Sydney when they're displaying flags of listed terrorist organisations and other symbols of terrorist organisations. That's a crime, and yet no one has been convicted of that. And I think police and the federal government have been too slow to address that. I think if they had acted sooner, if they had shown that there were consequences for this behaviour sooner, we might have avoided the escalation that we've seen, because I think extremists in our community have become emboldened.
Yeah, although you hear the ASIO chief, Mike Burgess, say he doesn't think the government, it's fair to put this onto the government, given there was already a hotbed of right-wing and extremist and anti-Semitism sentiment in the community even before October 7.
That's certainly true. We have had anti-Semitism in Western societies for centuries. It's not a new phenomenon, we all know that, but it has exploded since the 7th of October. And the statistics from Victoria Police are very clear. Anti-Semitism is about 10 times more prevalent than the next most common hate crime crime type reported to Victoria Police. And Mike Burgess himself said on Insiders not that long ago that anti-Semitism is far more prolific than other forms of hatred. So I think it has required, an understanding of the seriousness of that and much more resolve from the government much earlier.
Given the environment we're operating in, Mike Burgess said this yesterday, that he's concerned that there's a very volatile environment, that we need to watch our words, that maybe we need to really be looking at more cohesion. Is that something you're thinking about as a political party, that we need to be building bridges and we need political parties to come together at moments like these?
I think that's right. I think we do need to be measured and calm in our language in responding to serious incidents like this, but it is also the job of the opposition in a liberal democracy to hold the government to account for what we see as their failings. And we're not alone in seeing these failings. I mean, the President of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, Daniel Aguillon, was quoted in the papers today saying he has not been contacted by any senior minister of the government over this weekend, that he and the Jewish community feel like they have been abandoned, that they feel like the government has been paralysed in responding to this. And he's one of many voices that have said things like that over the last few months.
Was it appropriate, do you think, for Peter Dutton to criticise Josh Burns, a Jewish MP who lives in that community, who himself has been the target of anti-Semitism?
Look, as Peter said, Josh is a good guy, and I see a lot of Josh and we get along very well. We're often at the same events in the community. I think the sad truth is that the Labor Party has stopped listening to Josh a long time ago, and he hasn't been successful in influencing the government's policy when it comes to protection of the Jewish community or foreign policy, particularly relating to Israel. And I don't go to a Jewish community function these days without someone from the Jewish community coming up to me and saying they're a lifelong supporter or even member of the Labor Party, but for the first time at this election they won't be supporting Labor because they feel so let down by the Labor Party. I mean, just last night I was at the Mount Scopus Memorial Dinner at the school, and someone came up to me who said they were 70 years old. They've been a member of the Labor Party for decades. They've supported Michael Danby and Josh on all of their campaigns, but at this election they'll be supporting Benson Saulo, the Liberal candidate, because they just feel so let down.
All right, we might ask Josh about that when he's on the program a little later. Can we move to another issue? Why wouldn't Peter Dutton stand in front of a flag that means so much to Aboriginal people?
Look, the Indigenous and Torres Strait Island flags have a very important place in Australia, and they are an important symbol for our country. But I think it's really important for any country to have one national flag and one national symbol, because I think we need to have unifying symbols in the age that we're living in.
Doesn't it unify the country to acknowledge 65,000 years of heritage?
Of course we should acknowledge that heritage, and all Australians should be proud of that heritage. It's a remarkable heritage that we should have a responsibility to share and uphold and be custodians of. But I can't think of another country in the world that has multiple flags and is a united, cohesive
Can't think of many
country.
other countries that have that history, though, can you?
Well, actually, there's lots of countries that have Indigenous populations that have long histories. But if we're a country that decides we're different tribes, that we have different flags, that we should follow different causes, then I think we become less united and more divided.
Quite a lot of different tribes in Australia, though, James. We've got hundreds, and a really proud history, and that means a lot to elders. I mean, I just wonder, is it a decision you've made in consultation with elders? How would you explain that to an Aboriginal elder, that you don't want to stand beside the Aboriginal flag at press conferences?
Well, I would say that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island flags have an important place in our country, and in the right setting at the right times, of course, they have an appropriate role, and I think they will always be a feature of public life in our country. But when the Prime Minister of Australia is standing up to make a statement to the country on behalf of the country, I think it's a unifying symbol to say, this is our flag, we have one national flag, and we stand beside it.
Do you have a policy on welcomes to country and acknowledgements of country, and is that something you'll speak about at the election?
We certainly haven't announced any policies there. My own personal view is that in some contexts it is appropriate and it should be done, but it doesn't need to be done at every event, and it doesn't need to be done by multiple speakers at every event. I think some people find it a bit tiresome when we have 5 or 6 acknowledgements of country. I think we should do it at significant occasions and relevant occasions, but sometimes I think it is overdone.
OK, thanks for your time. Thanks,
Thank
James.
you.
Well,